Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So yesterday Baron Zemo's deep dive came out and I have been a bit busy, but I am here nonetheless, so let's get to it and break it down. So he is a skill character and out of the both champions he doesn't look quite as exciting as Absorbing Man at the first glance. However, there are actually quite a few things that I personally really do like about him, and I'm secretly kind of hopeful about him because a lot of the things in his kit seem to be easily accessible and, most important, permanent. So once you activate, you do not need to think about, you know, maintaining them or having any fancy rotations or anything like that. The crucial point it is going to be to see how easy or hard it is going to be implement all of it. But, you know, in ideal world, he has de-accelerate debuff at the 50% potency when he roots opponents. So based on a match, once you get both of them up, you know, opponents' evade and unstoppable effects are completely disabled. Whilst opponents are rooted, he can also bypass miss completely. There is a 40% disorient, which unfortunately isn't quite potent enough. And one cool thing that I really do like about him is that he can get permanent bleed debuffs relatively straightforward. And then obviously they're permanent unless opponent has some sort of purification abilities. You know, it just kind of like continuously working in the background. So we'll see. He's typically not the type of champion to get me overly excited, but in this case, I'm actually really curious and I do quite like him. I also really love the fact that his medium attacks are non-contact projectiles, so they do not make contact, which automatically will make him actually a very good counter to Korg, especially with his attack bonuses when Korg is going to get rooted, and Korg is one of the champions which is going to be easier to root with Baron Zemo. Right, so let's break down his kit more or less. He starts fights with 5 cleanse passives. They cannot cleanse stun debuffs, but they will cleanse any other debuffs that you can apply. Presumably also getting rid of Liquid Courage Double Edge, so that alone is at least intriguing for a skill class in my opinion. Hopefully it works that way. And then, once you do expend all 5 cleanse charges, you gain an armor up buff, increasing your armor rating by a very significant amount for 20 seconds, and then it basically restarts the cycle. But also, when you expend your 5 cleanse charges, you root the opponent, and the root is very important in his kit to kind of get things going, because when opponent's rooted, he can't miss, he gains additional benefits, every single hit inflicts bleed, permanent bleed on the opponent. So against any champion that inflicts a lot of debuffs by default, like it was showcased against Immortal Abomination, or probably like Anti-Venom, or perhaps Mr. Fantastic or something like that, he's likely going to be very good. While this armor up is active, Zemo can't gain cleanses, of course, and it's just basically to make sure that he can't spam root in debuff heavy matchups, so there will be that 20-second kind of like pause there. Also, whilst opponents rooted, they have reduced combat power rate, which is awesome. When you root the opponent, you inflict de-accelerate debuff at 50% potency. It is basically half a slow debuff in a sense. It does both things. It can be activated against champions that you have class disadvantage with, so in a sense it's actually a bit better. And it's a passive and it's permanent. So in a generic matchup, you will need to throw 2 level 2s in order to completely shut down opponents' evades and unstoppables, and that by no means is an easy task. Therefore, there will be many champions that are much better at dealing with evade and unstoppable than Baron Zemo in a generic matchup. But in specialized situations, he will be quite cool, because you'll get the first one up as you expend your first 5 charges, then build up to level 2, and done and dusted. And then, as I said, all of those bleeds are permanent. Now, they're not very potent at all, but as we saw earlier, if it is a longer fight, you can stack up a ton of them, and they will be working in the background completely persistently throughout the entire fight. So I'm kind of hopeful against the guy, I must say. He's definitely going to be very good against Quicksilver as well, in my opinion. And here we can see that reduced combat power rate, ability to bypass miss when opponents are rooted. I think if he's awakened, you can also inflict all of these abilities and the bleeds through block. And one annoying thing, if opponent exits the route early, for instance with throwing special attack, so if you are going to be fighting against Baron Zemo and you get rooted, you will still get 5 bleeds inflicted upon you, which could be very, very annoying kind of to deal with. But again, his medium attacks make no contact, therefore he can do champions like Korg and Electro just fine without much problems. And also, when opponents are immune to one of his effects, he gains a Fury buff for his next attack. It is a permanent Fury buff, but it only basically affects your next hit. But it does give you quite a significant damage bonus, and then if he works as well as it looked like he could against Korg, for instance, because one combo basically took down the remainder of this Korg's health, and here we can see that Baron Zemo is a maxed out 4-star against 6-star. So it could be very, very interesting. I definitely do want to test him out, at the very least, I will say that. I know a lot of people are not overly enthusiastic about this guy, but I definitely want to test him out because he could have some very interesting applications. Most importantly in the game modes and in the settings that I care about most. So that remains to be seen. His Disorient, I think, well, it activates on level 1, it's permanent, it reduces their block proficiency by 25%, but defensive ability accuracy only by 10%, and therefore I think it's borderline kind of pointless because you need 4 level 1s to kind of get them up there. I just think it's a bit too slow in generic situation. I don't think it's much of a great ability. I do think that he is extremely reliant on root, because without root he can barely get any bleeds on opponent, only with like his level 1s, and that's just not anywhere fast enough to be really functional. His level 3 is neat. I don't think anything too crazy. I do think he will need his awakened ability, which is going to give him more critical damage rating and let him crit through opponent's block. Also, in fighting heroes, attacks that intercept the opponent gain extra critical rating, so that's not too bad either. But that's kind of about it in his kit. So rotation's fairly straightforward. In a generic matchup, you just build up to nearly 3 bars of power, make sure opponent doesn't have too much power, throw your special attack, and then they get rooted, then start spamming hits, throw your special ones, that pauses the root and puts an extra bleeds on them. If you're like super aggressive, you can get about 30 permanent bleeds with that one rotation. But again, we just have to see how well he does in short to medium level fights. In longer fights, I'm sure he's going to be, fine for what he needs to do, but a lot of his ramp up does seem to be quite slow outside of specific circumstances. Same as his, damage, especially with those permanent bleeds. So we'll see whether it is kind of like a shooty situation or something better. So that definitely remains to be seen, but I'm still intrigued. He does have some quite cool synergies. This first one, don't pay much attention to it because, who would ever want to spam a full team with Baron Zemos? I always really hated those synergies. Basically just, a YouTube video showcase synergy, in real situation when you try to do Act 7, first of all, you can't put in more than 2 anyways because you can't in 4 stars in, let's say, Act 7, and second of all, it's just, I think creating these synergies is just quite literally for some sort of showcase videos. That's the only place where it really gets used. I don't like them. You gain 50% bleed potency, which is very good for each other Baron Zemo on a team, and additionally gain 5% bleed potency for each rank into deep wounds that you will get by default. But it's unlikely that when you're going to be doing hard content, you're all of a sudden going to want to run 3-star and 4-star and 5-star Baron Zemos, for instance. It's just not going to happen. Now, another one, gain 3% attack rating for each villain on the team. This one's quite decent. This bonus is doubled when fighting against heroes. So this type of synergy I like, because it's active all the time. If you happen to have some villains, cool, you get some bonus. I do like this bit. Also, Thunderbolt champions gain 3% perfect block chance and take 5% less special attack damage for each Thunderbolt on the team. These bonuses are doubled on fighting villains. Again, this is quite neat because if you just happen to run some Thunderbolts on your team, you get this bonus automatically. Nothing else is needed to activate. These are the best kind of synergies in contrast. And Now here we have some more interesting ones. Baron Zemo with Sam Wilson and Bucky gain 500 armor rating and 500 critical damage. You know, it's not the best, it's not the worst, but for Captain America Sam Wilson and Falcon, gain 25% debuff duration. It does include stun, so this lets Captain America Sam Wilson and Falcon completely bypass Limber, I think, or should. So that should be quite interesting. And also critical damage rating, nice. Winter Soldier also gains debuff duration and armor rating, so it's not too bad at all there. Now we have Apocalypse, Doctor Doom, and Doctor Octopus. Invasion of Body Snatchers. Gain 300 critical rating when fighting skill or cosmic champions, 300 block proficiency when fighting science or tech champions, 30% regeneration rate when fighting mystic or mutant opponents. You know, it's quite nice. Why not? With that 30% regeneration rate increase, you can afford to quite easily run Liquid Courage Double Edge with Apocalypse, Doctor Doom, and stuff like that against the Mystic or Mutant champs. So that's kind of interesting, because that would also work with Willpower Healing and your Liquid Courage Double Edge debuffs. And gain all bonus when fighting superior opponents. You know, you don't really do that most of the time. This synergy, however, it does really seem quite interesting. And I think it's going to be very, very useful for specific things. Now, dodging back and holding block activates 1.2 second timer. Releasing block just as the timer expires grants a Jiggy with it buff for 20 seconds. Increasing critical rating by 150, which is quite nice, but also granting an unstoppable passive while dodging backwards or dashing forwards. And that automatically basically gives to all of these characters, namely, let's say, Mantis and Baron Zemo, and also potentially Star-Lord, an ability to go unstoppable, therefore enabling them to do a whole bunch of, you know, different fights or take different nodes that otherwise they maybe wouldn't be able to. So it's quite interesting. I do want to kind of like mess around with it just for the sake of it. But this one is likely going to be kind of like more important one. Activating a special attack grants a non-stacking wishes buff, increasing the potency of damage over time debuffs by 50%. That is quite significant wishes buff for, let's say, Symbiote Supreme and Man-Thing, I would say. The problem with Immortal Abomination and Toad is that their damage over time effects don't really do damage, or more specifically, the damage over time debuffs don't really do that much damage. Almost all of the significant damage, you know, in both of their cases comes from passives instead of debuffs. Acid Wash for Immortal Abomination and the passive Poison for Toad, or again, bursts of damage for Immortal Abomination once Acid Wash is active, or, you know, special attacks and bursts of damage with Toad if you time your special 2 correctly. So it's kind of a bit odd in a champion selection here, because it definitely, you know, for both Immortal Abomination and Toad, I don't think there is much of an effect, because again, it specifically says debuffs, and only Man-Thing and Symbiote Supreme kind of like exclusively do the damage over time effects or bursts with debuffs. Immortal Abomination and Toad does it with passives, so I don't know. Is it an overlooking something, or I don't know, but this one's quite cool though. Obviously, Phoenix is a champion that needs to be buffed. At this point, Phoenix does have, however, a ton of insane synergies, and this is going to be one of these. Giving her Fury buffs, 100% increased potency is gonna lead to some, again, interesting Phoenix showcase videos where she's going to be hitting like an absolute tank when fully synergized up. But for Baron Zemo, it's also quite decent, where bullet hits during Zemo's medium attacks and special 2 can inflict Incinerate debuffs, dealing 20% of attack rating as energy damage over 6 seconds. Incinerate removes perfect block chance and reduces block proficiency. So damage-wise, it's not going to be anything special. Damage-wise, you know, it's going to be neat, nice to have, but just, you know, again, gaining access to Incinerate as prerequisite to be able to clear some different types of nodes and so on and so forth. It's quite interesting, and I quite like that. Also, this should help him to get that Fury quite persistently and easy in some questing scenarios, where when opponent is immune, he gets that Fury for his next hit. And if opponent's immune to this Incinerate, he should be getting that Fury, because this should be considered as his personal debuff that opponent is immune to. So that is the reason why I actually really like this synergy as well. And then with Phoenix, he could potentially be a bit of a monster, where if you go up against somebody that's Incinerate immune but not bleed immune, I would say, and then you root them, and I don't know, there could be something interesting there, for sure. Ultimately, Mr. Zemo here, I can understand why some people aren't overly excited for him. He's one of those characters that is quite unassuming, I would say. And overall, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that he's gonna be great. I don't know. He could be quite awful. Let's not gonna lie. His ramp up does seem quite slow because, again, in an average matchup, only way he activates a root is the level 2, and then it's only for 5 seconds, and you know, you kind of really need to line things up. And champions like that don't often do that great. Where you have limited time windows, you need to build up a ton of power before you start doing anything meaningful at all to begin with, so on and so forth. Let's see how Zemo works out. I think in his case, most important thing will be how well he does some of the problem matchups in a game. And if he does well enough, he could be a mainstay. If he's too slow, he's gonna fade away. That's the unfortunate reality of the characters. Most of the slow champions do not really get attention from the player base. And that's because 90+% of the fights that we do are relatively short and bursty fights. And nobody wants to spend 3 times the amount of time doing the fight if you have the option not to do it. And also the popular game modes largely feature short to medium length fights. Be that AQ, AW, Battlegrounds, standard daily questing. You only do longer fights, you know, every 3 months when new story content comes out, or when you finally do Abyss or something like that. And then there's still quite a lot of competition for the long fights, because there are tons of champions who are very good at those. So we'll see. I definitely will not immediately discard the character. I'm personally still quite intrigued. I do want to take a look at him. I do want to test him out. When early bundles come out, I'll probably get the 5-star, and I'll probably rank him up at least to rank 3, maybe to rank 5, to do some testing with him, and hopefully let you guys know that I actually did enjoy him. But either way, whether I do or don't, I will be truthful to you guys, and I'll tell you exactly how I personally find these characters to be. Let me know, what do you think about Baron Zemo's deep dive? I'll leave a link to the original video in the video description. See you around. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about the